A very good afternoon to all the Johnites and their family who have assembled here. It's my great privilege on behalf of the St. John's Medical College Alumni Association to welcome you all and invite you for this August Dr. Jayashree Thomas Memorial Oration. Dr. Jayashree was undergraduate from St. John's, very talented, very bright academically, won multiple awards. The most prestigious of them all in St. John's, the Pope Paul Award for the best outgoing student. And then she pursued her post-graduation in another premier institute, CMC Vellore. But tragically, we lost her early. In her memory of Dr. Jayashree Thomas, the Alumni Association has instituted the annual oration from the year 1984. And this year, in this historic Diamond Jubilee year, this is the 40th Dr. Jayashree Thomas Memorial Oration. To hear more about Dr. Jayashree, I would now like to invite Dr. Raj Lakshmi, Head of Department Pathology, to please introduce.
A very good afternoon to all of you and welcome back to St. John's. A brilliant student, an esteemed colleague, and a loyal, well-loved friend. These were the words penned by the legendary Professor John Thomas on the 8th of May 1982, a day after Dr. Jayashree Thomas left her loved ones prematurely. And this sentiment was echoed by every person who knew her, and now I wish I had too. Dr. Jayashree was a Johnite of the batch of 1968, and she completed her M.B.B.S. in 1975. She excelled at academics and stood first in anatomy, physiology, forensic medicine, and obstetrics and gynecology. She was adjudged the best outgoing student and was conferred the prestigious Pope Paul Prize for 1974. She also received the President's Silver Medal for standing first among all women candidates appearing for M.B.B.S. at Bangalore University. She gravitated towards pathology right from her undergraduate days and joined the department in 1975 as resident and later as tutor. During this period, she conducted a research project titled Fallopian Tube Morphology in Normal and Abnormal Menstrual Cycle, which was awarded the Dean Louis Montero Prize. In 1977, she was selected for MD Pathology at the Christian Medical College, Vellore. The MD examiners during her final year exams were thrilled to have such an accomplished candidate and were very eloquent in their praise for Dr. Jayashree's proficiency. With this flawless record and a desire to enrich her alma mater, she joined St. John's as Assistant Professor the same year. In a short span of 2 years, she authored 6 publications, 4 of them in international journals, a further testimony to her brilliance. In addition to being an exemplary student and keen researcher, Dr. Jayashree is remembered as a gentle, affectionate colleague and an innovative teacher. Her meticulousness is evident to this day in her collection of books which were kindly donated by her family to our library. The neatly handwritten notes at the end of every chapter are a pleasure to behold. Cooking was another passion, and she often had treated her colleagues to special dishes. In memory of Dr. Jayashree, the SJMC Alumni Association instituted this annual oration from the year 1984. The first oration was delivered by Professor Anand Date, the head of pathology, CMC Vellore, and the most recent one in 2022 was delivered by Dr. Shubha Dongre, consultant anesthetist, Liverpool Women's Hospital. To borrow from Elton John, your candle burned out long before your legend ever did. The bright spark that was Dr. Jayashree lives on to connect and inspire 2 great institutions, St. John's and CMC, in the form of this oration. I thank the Alumni Association for giving me this privilege of introducing Dr. Jayashree, and I also take this opportunity to invite all of you to visit the Professor John Thomas Memorial Pathology Museum that was unveiled just 2 days ago and located on the 2nd floor of this block. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Raj Lakshmi. As you rightly said, her memory lives on in the department and in the institute in the form of this oration. They say that true friends are never apart, maybe in distance, but never in heart. I choose this quote because of the topic of today's oration. And there is no one better to introduce someone and also give us some secrets, possibly, than a true friend and an M.B.B.S. batchmate. It is my honor now to invite Dr. Nagasubramaniam, the distinguished consultant urologist at St. John's Hospital and Manipal Hospitals from the batch of 1978, to introduce our orator for the 40th Dr. Jayashree Thomas Memorial Oration, Dr. Raghavendra Balika. Dr. Nagasubramaniam.
Good afternoon. It's my pleasure and a proud privilege to introduce my friend and a classmate of mine, Dr. Raghavendra Balika. Dr. Raghavendra Balika is now the Professor of Medicine and Cardiologist at the Ohio State University, and has also been the Chief of the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine. And also as well as the Chief Mentoring Officer for Clinical Faculties in the program. Now, if you see somebody who has gone places, this is the man. Starting from schooling at St. Joseph's, Namma Bangalore Huduga did his PUC in National College and joined St. John's in 1978 along with us. Now, during his days in the college, we obviously was a bright student, and along with that he had multiple skills. He could communicate orally, effectively, and also write down, and at that time he was a communication secretary, and he was in charge of the college bulletin. Following his graduation from St. John's, he joined Victoria Hospital, where he did his MD in internal medicine, and after training there he joined back as faculty in St. John's, during which I think he was the editor of St. John's Journal of Medicine. Now from here, during that time I think he was involved in alumni activities and also arranged for the H.J. Mehta Memorial Orations, and he was also very active in the alumni activities. Following this, I think he left to England, where he was trained in St. Mary's Hospital, London, Aberdeen Royal Infirmary and teaching hospitals, very prestigious hospitals where he worked on the heart, cardiovascular dynamics, regulation on insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, which are affecting the coronary artery disease. I think he has also published some books when he was in England, and later on moved to US to work at more prestigious places. He landed in Harvard Medical School doing research, and I think his research was on neurohormones controlling the heart. And from there he joined the Michigan University as a faculty, and from there he has moved on publishing a lot of articles in international journals, and he is an author of several books, and he has held leadership roles in the hospital as well as in the community. He has been the editor of Journal of American College of Cardiology, a flagship journal of the American College of Cardiology, that is JACC, and also the Associate Editor of European Journal of Preventive Cardiology. Dr. Baliga's contribution to medicine and in the field of cardiology has earned him several awards, and recently he has achieved a lifetime award from St. Joseph's Boys High School also for his contribution to the school as well. And it's my pleasure to invite him to give this oration, Dr. Jayashree Thomas oration. Dr. Baliga.
Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Dr. Raghavendra Baliga delivering the 40th Jayashree Thomas Memorial Oration.
Thank you so much for the very gracious introduction, and it's really a pleasure to see so many of my contemporaries from the dorm. And I'm also really honored to give this oration because both Dr. Jayashree Thomas and Dr. M.J. Thomas taught me, so this is very meaningful for me. She was an outstanding, soft-spoken teacher, and even M.J. Thomas is very soft-spoken. And in fact, when I exchanged emails with him, he said, "You were very quiet." So I was wondering, like, how could you be more quiet than M.J.? So these are some of these photographs of Jayashree and M.J. Thomas. This is a 1968 batch, which was 10 years senior to us, and she was a Pope Paul awardee. I would like to thank Father Paul and the Dean George D'Souza for inviting me, the organizing committee, Dr. Ranganath Naik, who is my mentor, Dr. Maya Mascarenas, Dr. Priya Pais, Dr. Dusari, and Dr. Nitin Murthy for inviting me to give this oration. Also wish the new director, Father Rajamanikam, every success in leading this institution. After the rapid fire round, he needs every good luck, I guess. So I really want to thank my dad and mom for allowing me to come to St. John's. And I say that because if you could see in the right-hand corner, I got into AFMC, I got into BMC, and the tuition at St. John's was several-fold more than any of those institutions, but they kind of sacrificed and let me come here. And I'm really lucky, and as I'll tell you in the future slides, that being a Johnite made a big difference in my trajectory. Thank you, Mom. She's sitting there, nearly 90 years old. I'd also like to thank my wife, and she's also Jayashree MJ, and for making me a better person. And my extended family, my siblings, and my aunts and uncles who are here, thank you. So, I'd like to start with thanking one of my classmates, Dr. Kevin Pereira. He was the organizing secretary for the first medical ball. And he assigned me the task of doing the brochure, and that's how I got into the kind of the publication realm. And the next year, Dr. Ranganaik entrusted me doing the brochure for the next ball in '84. And yesterday, Tejas Job said this was the first alumni committee ever. So I didn't realize that I belonged to the first alumni committee of St. John's. And this led to the alumni bulletin, and there are many of our alumni, including Tejas Job, Arun Kilpadi, Kishore Murthy, Maya Jacob, and others on this list. And as you'll see on the second page, the Jayashree Memorial Oration that year was given by Dr. John Thomas, and the H.J. Mehta was given by Dr. Waterlow. This experience with doing brochures actually gave us the idea, that's Dr. Anura Kurpad and myself, to start the St. John's Journal of Medicine. And I wasn't even a faculty member, I was an MD PG student when we started this journal way back. And And at that time, the very first article was a cardiology article written by Lieutenant General Narayanan, who delivered the late Jayashree Memorial Oration way back then. So you could see I've had deep roots in St. John's Alumni Association. Here's a letter from Dr. Salim Yusuf supporting the journal, and I know that Dr. Ramesh is the current editor of the journal. Very quickly, disclosures, I have a lot of books, and I may be referring to them in this talk. And when I was the editor of Heart Failure Clinics of North America, Dr. Eugene Brownwald talked about biomarkers. So today's talk will be talking about risk and biomarkers in heart disease. And finally, this is for the medical students. If they want access to these textbooks, shoot me an email and I'll make it happen for you all gratis. And I've been involved in India with the STEMI program run by Dr. Thomas Alexander, Dr. Ajay Malusuri, and Dr. Ranga Nayak. So a good life is a balance of four cardinal pillars: health, wealth and fame, family, and community and society. People who only work in community and society are our sisters and nuns, and kudos to them. And giving back is really important. Family, most homemakers take care of the family and they do a lot of good work. And a lot of people work, spend a lot of time on their careers. I do recall one of my cousin's husband was a hedge fund manager in New York City making tens of millions of dollars, complained of little chest pain and passed. And I still remember my cousin saying, what's the point of having wealth if you don't have health? And so today's talk is about health and how one can improve one's own health. And I think one of the most important things which I, as a cardiologist, could talk about is how we can protect our hearts. This is an editorial I wrote with Dr. Jagat Narula on protecting 1 billion hearts. The United Nations estimates by 2050 there'll be 9 billion people on this planet, and of these 7.1 of the billion people now, 0.8% die every year, and 7 million die of ischemic heart disease, and nearly 7 million die of strokes. And this is eminently preventable. Every 26 seconds in the US, an American has a heart attack, and every 45 seconds, an American has a stroke. And recently, the ICMR, in a report submitted to the Rajya Sabha, said heart attacks account for 28% of the deaths in this country. It's even, heart disease kills more women, heart disease and stroke, than breast cancer, ovarian cancer, uterine cancer, and HIV. And as you can see from each one of those symbols, 5 deaths per 100,000 women, most of the people die of either coronary artery disease or strokes. More women experience severe fast heart attacks than men. And in fact, the recent celebrity, she had a sudden death, and it's probably due to a heart attack. And that's why it's really important that both men and women are aware about how we can prevent heart disease. What is a heart attack? So in the middle figure shows a normal coronary artery. There are no blockages. On my left is the narrowed artery, which is the plaques which narrow the arteries. And with age, there's more narrowing of the arteries. And this happens just like my gray hair. I can keep on exercising, but narrowing does occur, and it is eminently preventable. So when I went to the U.S., doing the St. John Journal of Medicine, I was managed to connect with Dr. Chris Mathias, who's in the middle photograph here, and he gave me my first break. He's both a Johnite and a Josephite like me. And I was pretty fortunate to work with him. And through him, I got connected to Professor Stan Peart and Professor Jaspal Kuhner at the Hammersmith Hospital. And this is one of the papers we did in England. And I actually did insulin clamps, looking for insulin resistance. I did about 40 insulin clamps. And this was a study in Punjabi Sikhs in Southall. And I was not aware at that time that the Sikh community doesn't smoke by religion. And it was interesting, way back then, in the early to mid 90s, a lot of the Sikh community are dying at heart attacks at a very premature age. And our paper was one of the first to report abdominal obesity and insulin resistance in people with premature heart attacks. And today's talk will highlight why abdominal obesity is something which we need to know more about, and more research needs to be done. What is a stroke? Just like the blood when the blood supply to the heart is narrowed and the vessel is blocked, you get a heart attack when the blood supply to the heart. Similarly, when the blood supply to the neck is blood supply to the brain is compromised, you get what is called an ischemic stroke, and the pathophysiology is very similar. That is atherosclerosis narrowing. And when there's a narrowing in the blocked coronary artery, what happens is, if you have three kinds of people, someone with a 30% blockage, someone with a 70% blockage, or someone with a 90% blockage, the one who's most likely to get the heart attack is the one with the 30%. It's called the vulnerable plaque. These plaques are vulnerable to rupture. They rupture, and as you can see in the blocked coronary arteries, a clot blocks off the vessel. That's when an interventional cardiologist like Dr. Ranganayak, or the head of the department here, Dr. Sri Lakshmi, or Dr. Kiran Varghese, go down there and deploy the balloon and deploy the stent, which looks like a little spring for those who are not cardiologists. And when there are too many blockages, there are the cardiac surgeons can go in there and bypass the blocked arteries by taking arteries either from the subclavian artery, or they can use a vein to bypass the blocked artery. This is my mentor, Dr. Jerry Mascarenhas. I met him on the medical school ball committee, and he was a pretty fun guy, and he took me under his wings. He used to invite me for all his parties, so I'm sure he's looking down at me here. This is the lower photograph is where I'm singing at his son Mark Mascarenhas' wedding. So no other dean has invited me to his house since then. So I have fond memories of St. John's. So if you look at the plaques, as I said, that the ones which are most likely to rupture and block the arteries are the ones which are the 30 to 50% plaques. And that's why you will see someone who would have passed a stress test a few months earlier, and then you actually they come to the hospital with a heart attack. But increasingly, there is data that the vulnerable plaque is vulnerable because it's inflamed, and there are newer therapies, or actually older therapies like colchicine, can prevent that inflammation. And then there are studies now, which has just been approved by the FDA in the last month or so, which the nuclear studies can actually tell which of the plaques are inflamed, and we can appropriately tailor therapy. So that's the next agenda in cardiology. This is a picture of the mummies from Egypt. In fact, when they went and looked at the mummies at Egypt, they found that the coronary artery plaques were, there was coronary calcium, and a lot of people like to do CT scans to look at the coronary artery calcium, and one could argue, is coronary artery calcium scoring too late to prevent blockages? A lot of people would not take the therapies even until they see coronary artery calcium. They say, oh, my coronary artery calcium score is 0, but if it is high, then you're probably already, the train has left the station. So today I'm going to talk about American Heart Association, a few aspects of life's essential 8. That's eat better, manage weight, be more active, control cholesterol, quit tobacco, manage blood pressure, get good sleep, and manage blood sugar. This is a photograph of Dr. Ravi Narayan, who was and Thelma Narayan, who are my tutors. and Dr. Bobby Joseph and Arvind Kasturi, both Josephites like me. And the reason I have them all together is their approach to medicine, prevention, 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 is the way forward. And kudos to them for doing it. For some reason, even in the US, the mortality is high not because we have low quality of healthcare. Our healthcare is one of the best in the world. Our prevention is one of the worst in the world. And I think the main theme from this talk is prevention. And then for the next slides, keep watching all these slides because I'm going to zip through them quickly. So this is the obesity trends in the US. And if you look at it in 1985, I live in Ohio. Is there a lighter, is there a laser pointer here? You know, if you can't see it, the Irish. So I live in Ohio, and our rival state in Michigan for football. So just look at these two states or the next few trends. So 1985. So now, way back in 1985, there was the obesity trends were less than. There's not much numbers, I think. There was not much data, but if you can look at the obesity trends, will keep increasing over the next few years. You can see. Now Michigan's caught up with Ohio. 10 to 14% of the population, 88, was obese in the US. Then slowly the numbers keep growing. And then now you can see Michigan and Ohio. And slowly the states around are getting obese. Now it's nearly 20%. 1995, 10 years later, half the country is obese geographically, if not by population. And you can see now greater than 20% is obese in our neighborhood, Indiana. Now Michigan's is more than 1 in 5 are obese in 98. And 99, 2000, you can see Ohio is caught up with Michigan. And now more than 25% of the population. And you can see obesity in this is the last data in 2006. More recent data said that even in youth and adolescents, up to 20% are obese. And in fact, if you can see that in this graph that a lot of the obesity in the US started in the 1980s, somewhat coinciding with the switch from cane sugar to corn sugar. And you can see this is a body mass index, and I would argue that body mass index doesn't capture the whole story. If you can look at, if your height is around 5 foot 6 inches, if you're more than 186 pounds, you're obese. If you're around 5.9, if you're more than 200 pounds, but this is for the Western population. And the WHO has a separate cutoff for Asians and people like us from India. And the cutoff for BMI is 23. So if you're above 23, you're above the healthy range. And so about 27, you know, it's really bad. So something to keep in mind. And in fact, the ICMR had a paper recently in Lancet, and you can see that abdominal obesity is as high as 40%. That's 350 million people in the US. Okay, just focus on abdominal obesity because I talked about it in my paper. More and more of us, there are about 230 people with both diabetes and pre-diabetes. And this is a study in the American College of Cardiology when they found that if you have central obesity, the mortality is double digits. If there's an obese person without central obesity, the mortality is much lower. In fact, with a thin person with central obesity, the mortality is higher than an obese person who doesn't have central obesity. So central obesity is the new biomarker of heart disease. And if there's one goal you have by the end of the day is how you can reduce your central obesity, that should be your goal. It's hard to do. And in a recent study which was published in one of the Lancet journals, showed that abnormal obesity, and this is recent data from 2021, you can see that all our neighboring states here in Karnataka, central obesity is growing in magnitude. It was found to be in 40% of women and 32% of men. So your goal is to see what you can do about preventing central obesity. In fact, Professor Venkat Narayan at Emory, another Johnite, and Professor Anurag Karpad, who works here with the nutrition research, had a very elegant research framework for defeating diabetes in the 21st century. This is a recent paper. And my own interest in being one of the associate editors of the Oration Journal of Preventive Cardiology is it takes a village to reduce cardiovascular risk. It's not a one-person effort. You need the whole family. You need your family and friends to do that. And protecting 1 billion hearts, I'll be talking to you about opportunities on how we can do to mitigate this increased cardiovascular risk in our community. So all these years we have been focusing on insulin resistance and diabetes mellitus, and I think we are kind of losing a lot of the patients who still get heart disease when they're pre-diabetic. And in fact, now the new kind of approach is not to use the word pre-diabetes, because then it kind of sends a signal that it's not risky. And really we need to reframe the conversation that it's about being vulnerable to carbohydrates. And in the next few slides, I'll be talking about carbohydrate vulnerability. And one of the hypotheses from James Neal from the University of Michigan, where I worked as faculty, had this thrifty genotype hypothesis. The hypothesis is that the Asian gene is probably programmed for low-calorie diets. And so what really we should be focusing on is maybe a calorific intake of 1,500 calories and less. And when we pass that speeding limit, as I call it, one is more likely to be more vulnerable to carbohydrates, develop insulin resistance and diabetes mellitus, which is a spectrum, and develop more heart disease. In fact, this is another important data point is the number of pounds per sugar has continued to increase in the last century and contributes to the carbohydrate vulnerability or pre-diabetes or insulin resistance, whatever one likes to call it. And today I'm going to focus on portion control and exercise. Portion control is really hard. Our parents told us not to waste food. People are starving. And in fact, I would argue that I'd much rather you trash your food than trash your body by eating. In fact, in our house, whenever there's a birthday, we bring a cake. Each one has a slice. And then my wife opens the trash can and throws the cake. And my mother is visiting me from India, and she said, "Oh my God, you're wasting the cake." Our philosophy is you much rather trash the food rather than trash your body. Don't overeat. And some of the things you can do, this is called the Delboff illusion. The same portion on a smaller plate looks larger, while on a bigger plate looks smaller. So get rid of all the big plates, give it away to Salvation Army or give it to the hospital mess. Keep small plates, eat small portions. It's not easy to lose weight. You need a village to lose weight. You need your family and friends to do it. Another way to lose weight is do a 20-minute pause between courses. So if you actually pause, by the time in 20 minutes, it sends a signal to your brain, the neuropeptide Y and ghrelin hormones, and you're less likely to eat less. Especially take the 20-minute pause between your dessert and your last serving of the meal, because you want to eat less of the dessert, less carbs. At the end of the day, all diets are ELF diets, whether it's the South Beach diet or the Atkins diet. And as many of you know, ELF is eat less food. Okay, it's hard to eat less food, but it's something you have to kind of compel yourself to do it. We recently had an editorial, Dr. Narula and myself, on religious fasting and vascular health. You know, the previous generations knew the importance of frugality, whether it was Lent or Ramadan or Yom Kippur or Ekadashi. They did reduce their portion sizes, and so and we have kind of ignored it. You know, when I was growing up, the biscuits were like this small. They were like ginger snaps, and now they're like Frisbees, and we eat 2 or 3 of them because we are not supposed to waste food. And I would argue that this is a plea to cut down on your portion size. Heart disease, diabetes is eminently preventable. For example, we have these severely obese patients, you know, 400 pounders, they can't exercise. Just by doing gastric bypass, what gastric bypass does is it reduces your portion size, you eat less. I've had patients who have lost 100 pounds and their diabetes has gone away. So one would argue that if one does portion control, insulin resistance will improve. With, of course, this should be supported by exercise. And you know, Mahatma Gandhi used fasting as a political tool, but one of his statements was really interesting. He said, food should be taken as one takes medicine in measured doses at measured times, and as required. He said a full meal is a crime against God and humanity. Okay, so hopefully today when you go to bed, these words will ring in your head that, you know, you should try to limit your intake. And of all the foods, I would argue it's carbohydrates. This is a study by Dr. Salmi Yusuf, who's a giant in cardiovascular epidemiology. He's sitting there in the front row. He, along with 200 investigators, collected data from 135,000 individuals from 18 countries. And this is the largest prospective observational study. And they found that higher intakes of fats, monosaturated fatty acids, and total polysaturated fatty acids and animal protein was associated with lower mortality, whereas carbohydrates intake was associated with increased mortality. So portion control with low carbs is the way forward. When I worked with Jaspal Kuder, I was his cardiology fellow. I got all his my cardiology training. We looked at meal components, carbohydrates, and we looked at neurohormones after different components of food. And we found that plasma noradrenaline increased after carbs. This was way back in 1997, but not after fat or protein. So catecholamines are fight-flight hormones. So whenever you are taking a high-carb diet, you're kind of priming the pump. And this is another argument to cut down on the carbs at a mechanistic level. In addition to cutting carbs, you have to estimate a calorie needs, and I'll be happy to send you this table. But people above 50, and I would argue after 45, need less carbs, at least 10% less than the youngsters. In fact, you know, whenever I go to neighborhood barbecues in the swimming pool, the young kids are jumping into the water, and they're up and running, and while the grown-ups are eating barbecue meat and bread. And one could argue that it's really, really important. We need to be more active rather than eat more. In fact, when I drive around the subdivision where I live, if you look at the basketball hoops, it's only youngsters, no grown-ups exercising. And so it's really, really important to balance your needs. Michael Phelps, the Olympic champion, used to eat 12 eggs a day, but he also swam 12 hours a day. So it's energy management. In fact, a can of Coke, if you look at it at the bottom, it's 140 calories. To burn those 140 calories, you have to do 20 minutes of square dancing. So just keep in context. I've had patients when they've moved from full strength Coke to diet Coke, they've lost 10, 20 pounds. And ideally, you should probably just drink water rather than any of these processed liquids and foods. now I'm switching gears to exercise. And one of the things they found that when you do a sweaty workout, you're less likely to have dementia, and kind of makes sense. If you're sweating, there's less blood flow going to your brains. There's less blood flow going to your brains because there's blood flow going to your skin. So during COVID, people couldn't go to the gym, and I had to come up with a way of motivating our patients to exercise, because going to the gym requires a certain kind of commitment to go all the way to the gym, even if you have a gym membership. So what I would do is get the patients to keep 2 chairs 6 foot apart and do a figure of 8 for 40 minutes. Start with 5 minutes in the first day and add a minute every day up to 40 minutes daily. One of the things you could use is trekking carbon sticks, particularly as we age. I've lost an inch of height with age. So one of the things to do is use the trekking sticks and walk, particularly as we get older. And strength training is important, so I encourage people, when you're watching TV, if you like to watch TV, when the ads come on, do chair sit-ups. Just get up from sitting position, do at least five every hour, or maybe even 15. And more recently, during COVID, especially when we had the lockdown, I encourage people to sing, because when you sing, it's uplifting, your lungs improve. It's hard to sing. And I put Tom Chandy because I enjoyed his singing last night, and also brought me fond memories of my teacher, Dr. Alfred Mascarenhas, the previous dean and surgeon, who used to sing and play the piano. So, of course, many patients say, "Oh, doc, I can't sing." So put the music on, and even if it's Christmas carols or Wheels of the Bus, try to sing every day. If you can buy a karaoke machine, power to you, you know. So I encourage people to sing. In fact, most recently, the European Heart Journal has asked me to write an article on singing and heart disease. And if someone wants to do research, I think it's very ripe to explore the relationship between singing and heart disease. It's unexplored research. But people sing in churches and temples because it's uplifting, and I'm sure it improves cardiovascular health. In fact, there was a paper that the acute effects of singing and cardiovascular biomarkers, but something one can explore. So regular exercise is critical for good health, but too much can be too bad. This is an inverted bell-shaped curve or a U-shaped curve. If you run marathons and do ultra marathons, you actually reduce your mortality. It reduces your survival. So it's really important that you don't exercise more than 40 minutes. The optimal activity is about 40 to 50 minutes of exercise every day, no marathons. In fact, when you run marathons, so many of my friends have worn out their hip joints. If you are wearing out your hip joints, you're wearing out your cardiovascular system. So it's really important. Now I'm going to switch to the last talk of the talk, talking about dyslipidemia. There's only one number I want you to remember, LDL cholesterol, which is actually low density cholesterol. But I'd like you to remember L is for lousy cholesterol. And today, the next few slides is about keeping it less than 55. So in the US, most recent statistics, 6.1% of male adolescents and 3.3% of female adolescents have LDL cholesterols of more than 130. What is desirable cholesterol? This is total cholesterol. If you look at hunter-gatherer humans, the total cholesterol is less than 110. While in the adult American, it's 210, okay? And this is an article by Dr. Narula in the European Heart Journal. Infants have an LDL of around 40, and by the time of age of 10 or 12, it goes up to 70. In the table on the left-hand side, you can see 50-year-old males have an LDL of 154, while women, until about post-menopause, the LDLs are lower, but post-menopause, the LDLs catch up with men. So one could argue that the one reason for high risk is high LDL. And if you see the LDL from 40, which what infants have, for every 40 milligram increase in LDL, there is a 30% increase in heart attacks, 1/3. So from 40, an LDL of 40 to 70, it's 1/3 more high risk. From 70 to 100, it's equivalent to another 30% higher risk of heart attacks. In fact, If you look at the bullet here, right here, which you look at LDL, the National Lipid Association says that in Indians who are high risk or have had a stent, their LDL should be less than 30, okay? And the European Society of Guidelines suggests that the LDL target should be less than 55. The first dose of any statin gives the biggest bang for the buck, and when you double the statin dose from 10 milligrams, say, to 20 milligrams, it reduces the LDL by another 7%, and so on. But at least take the lowest dose of a statin. So this is an interesting trajectory of my own cholesterol. I take two medications to keep my cholesterol low. Way back in 2015, my LDL was 90. Now it's in the 50s. Because, you know, the new target is you want an LDL cholesterol less than 55. So I take rosuvastatin 40 and I take ezetimibe 10. And I'm sharing this news so that you can reflect on what you want to take. And it's interesting, you know, I showed you the BMI data, but you know, my BMI, my A1C is 5.1 when it was 21. And in fact, when my BMI goes to 16, that's when my A1C returns to called the normal range. So I would argue that the WHO BMI for us desis is even not stringent enough. And I would argue that you should look at both A1C and BMI simultaneously. There are newer medications to reduce cholesterol levels. Subcutaneous injections you can take every two weeks. In fact, Dr. Braunwald, who's a giant in cardiology, takes it. His LDL is 40, and he has openly said that. There are 3 trials which show that not only do these new medications lower LDL, but it's improved with associated improved cardiovascular outcomes. There are new therapies which are being investigated. Just yesterday, the SELECT study showed that semaglutide also improves outcomes in people with obesity. So this is another option. And this study is important because everyone thinks lifestyle can do it. And if you look at a lifestyle, does only very minimal reduction. So you need all the medications. You need good nutrition. You need to lower your blood pressure. You need to take your statin. And cumulatively, you have a 7% reduction. So this is people who are pre-diabetic, who have metabolic syndrome or type 2 diabetics. And that's why, hot off the press, the WHO just approved the polypill. It's where you can, all these medications you can take simultaneously in addition to lifestyle. Kudos to Dr. Dennis Xavier, Dr. Prem Pius, and Dr. Salim Yusuf. And more recently, colchicine is just out of the press, and so I encourage people to take consider colchicine. Hopefully the polypill will include colchicine in the future, Dr. Yusuf. And so my message is, keep an eye on your LDL cholesterol. You want it to be less than 55. Go to a lipid clinic, maybe establish a lipid clinic in your hospital with pharmacists. These new subcutaneous injections are underway. The inclisiran, hopefully it's subcutaneous. You'll have to take it twice a year, and will keep your LDL low. So in the future, maybe you can just take your COVID shot, your flu shot, and your cholesterol shot once a year, and you're done. With that, I'm going to stop and see Dr. M.J. Thomas here. I tell Dr. Thomas, I'm a psychologist too, because I'm telling people eat less, exercise more. That's all behavioral response, behavioral. So thank you once again. I want to finish off by saying it's really great to be a Johnite. Thank you.
It was a wonderful talk by Dr. Baliga, truly shedding lights on the ELF concepts to live longer, and also the ideal target of LDL, because it's not just the lab which gives a normal range, but what is the true. Once again, a big round of applause to Dr. Baliga. I would like to request him to please occupy the seat for the felicitation of the orator. On behalf of the Alumni Association, I would like to request Dr. George D'Souza, Dean, who is also the patron of the St. John's Medical College Alumni Association, and Dr. Anthony Robert, President of the Alumni Association, to felicitate our orator, Dr. Raghvendra Baliga. I'd like to request Dr. Robert to hand over the plaque on behalf of the Alumni Association. I'd like to request the Dean to felicitate him with a shawl. He described himself as Mannina Maga, or son of the soil yesterday, and true to tradition, a felicitation with shawl. I'd now like to invite Dr. Priya Paes to deliver the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the St. John's Medical College Alumni Association, I'd like to say a few thank yous to everyone who made this oration a success. First of all, my grateful thanks to Dr. Baliga. Sir, thank you. That was a wonderful oration. And thank you so much for coming all the way to deliver it in person. Thank you also to your family and especially your mum, madam. It's very nice to have you here. A big thank you to Dr. Naga Subramaniam for introducing the speaker, and Dr. Rajalakshmi for bringing in wonderful memories about Dr. Jayashree. It's wonderful to have you here, sir, Dr. MJ and ma'am. As part of Dr. Jayashree's family, it's an honor to have you here. Thank you so much for coming every year to be a part of this oration. We are grateful also to Father Charles, Associate Director of the College, for bringing the management presence here, and indeed to one and all who have graced the occasion and been part of this oration. We will now end by giving Dr. Nitin a big hand for organizing the oration and coordinating everything so smoothly, and also to the team on the academic committee, including the student volunteers who have worked very hard. We will now please rise for the St. John's anthem.
Stirs like all within my heart, in thee this pledge I seal.
To raise thee in shall be my God, to minister to thee.
With every moment born, come through thee with honesty.
Thy vision will endure sublime. He shall live because of me. St. John's with pride my song resounds. I hear thy pennant, blue or white. St. John's, I stay within me, bounds thee, thou my guide, my beacon light.
Sustained within God's grace, I stand thy yoke, so light I bear.
Where'er I toil of God, my hand inspire, promise him.
Thus hope my hopes, my fears, will thy love sets my courage free.
While yet my limbs have breath to sigh,
He shall live because of me.
St. John's with pride my
serve.